Despite what college girl Halloween costumes may make you think, the 80s were the opposite of stylish. Shoulder pads, leg warmers, tracksuits, and countless other bad ideas were rampant. It wasn't just the people either. Kitchens had a lot of tile and yellow wood, carpeted bathrooms were a thing, and of course the cars were butt ugly. For those of you already angrily writing in the comments, yes, there were a couple of cool cars like the G-Bodies, the BMW E30, the F40, not the Countach, that's an ugly overhyped doorstop on wheels, but the quote-unquote cool cars of the 1980s were few and far between. The majority of them were ugly blocks, even iconic ones like the Buick GNX, one of my dream cars, is really only cool because of the story, not the actual car. So, what caused the 80s cars to be so butt ugly? The answer is a little less simple than you'd think. Keep in mind, most of this is educated conjecture based on culture at the time. Also, before we go on ahead, just a reminder, I have a Redbubble. I sell canvas prints of the photos I take. I got hot rods, cruisers, heck, even Hot Wheels. Want it on a button? I'll put it on a button. Poster? Got that too. Want it on a hat for some godforsaken reason? Done and done. Link is down in the description below. Now, back to the video. Let's start with a little background on car design. The car started off pretty boxy, but really only stayed that way for about 5 to 10 odd years. I mean, come on, look at the early Model T. That thing is literally a box on wheels with a curvy fender here and there. And once old Henry Ford figured out the assembly line, created the 5-day work week, other automakers realized they gotta strike while the iron's hot. Since engines weren't that sophisticated, the name of the game was style. After all, the first auto body makers were carriage craftsmen. In the mid-20s, there was a boom in design. The automotive industry was charging full steam, gas, ahead, and new techniques were being discovered, leading to some sick sleek cars like the Buick Master 6, the Marmon Wasp Speedster, the Rolls-Royce Phantom 1, and tons others. In the 30s, as technology improved, cars became even curvier. Countless new designs were tried, and for the first time in history, aerodynamics mattered on a large scale. Engines were getting faster, with horsepower being consistently in the mid-2 digits to early 3-digit range. This led to automakers shooting for even more swoopy designs in the 30s, where air wasn't going to hold the car back as much as their earlier counterparts. They had to, as the Great Depression was in full swing, and for the first time, people had to consider their gas mileage when purchasing a vehicle, if they could even afford one at all. Now, these cars actually weren't that aerodynamic. They just didn't really have wind tunnel testing back then. They did, however, look a lot sleeker, giving the illusion of being aerodynamic to your average consumer. Smoother cars equaled futuristic design in their eyes, and so the buyer went with their gut. Now we're at the 40s. Car design didn't change all that much. In fact, some years cars didn't even have new releases because of this little event called World War II. The planet was a battlefield, and most of the big automakers had turned their attention to building tanks and planes instead of the coolest vehicles possible. The only benefit was that through war, there was a lot of new tech that would add to their own cars in the future, like better automatic transmissions, like the Hydra-Matic, improved steering, and of course the first Hemi. I know a couple of you are going to be curious about the last part. Long story short, Chrysler got a contract to create a new engine for some planes. They came up with the Hemi V16, and it pushed planes up to 490 miles per hour. Unfortunately, Germans created the jet engine and research went to that instead, but Chrysler remembered how awesome their Hemi motor was and made an 8-cylinder version in the 50s. This is obviously like a very dumbed down version, but if you want me to go into detail, let me know down in the comments below. Post-war, the world was a very different place. Gas was cheap, automakers had a lot of new tech to play with, and the World War II vets were busy making the most annoying and spoiled generation the world had ever seen, the baby boomers. Because era wasn't as important, cars instead became a reflection of class. After all, besides your home, they were the most expensive purchase you'd make, and people wanted to look a cut above the rest. This led to tons of cool designs, like the 53 Bel Air, which most of you know was my favorite because it's mine, the 1950 Buick Special, which I really want to work on one day, and of course the Tri-5 Chevys, which in my opinion are a little overhyped, but they're still pretty sick. Midway through the 50s, however, the little thing called the space race got started. Yeah, no, Russia and US were going at it yet again, who'd have thought? All of a sudden, there were huge fins, rocket booster lights, and a ton of space-age crap that still looks awesome and timeless today. 59 Caddy, 57 Bel Air, 57 Thunderbird, 59 Buick. Chrome was the name of the game because if you weren't shiny, you were old school, and nobody wanted to be old school. In the 60s, car makers decided to calm down with the excessive chrome. The baby boomers had started to grow up, and they had money in their pockets. I'm totally not stealing this from Ford versus Ferrari. They didn't want to drive cars that looked like their parents. They somehow wanted something that screamed new and aggressive, yet familiar. Enter the muscle car, a good combo of boxy and swoopy. I know this terminology is really showing my bachelor's degree was worth it. Most of these cars were built like a mullet, boxy in the front, smooth in the back, like the 66 Charger, the 70 Chevelle, and of course the fastback Mustang. In the 70s, things started to die down as many safety requirements started changing the way cars were designed. 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, airbag steering wheels, anti-lock brakes. Car manufacturers did not know what to do. They were changing pretty much a lot of like the style cues that, they'd grown to really depend on to get cars out the door. I go into more detail about it in this video here. Trust me, as much as I dislike 80s design, 70s is just so much worse. Let's move on. This is actually ticking me off. And now we're at the 80s. The gas crisis is fresh in everybody's mind. Most of the cars we see are adjusted versions of older models. The world needed something fresh, something new. But just what did new mean? What fresh design would be the recipe for distinction this decade? Well, it all comes down to this little software called CAD. You might have heard of it. It's used to design everything from, I don't know why I'm blanking out, knuckles. I'm just thinking of the most boring things to talk about. Body design. Basically, CAD helps with body design and any other design. See, before the age of computers, cars were mostly designed by sculptors using clay and sketches. However, in the late 70s and early 80s, CAD came out, also known as computer-assisted design. Remember that because I'm definitely not going to say it again. This new technology allowed designers to create a 3D model of the vehicle, basically allowing somebody to see the finished product before it ever even reached the executives. This new tech didn't completely do away with clay, however, but what it basically did was provide a new step in the creation process, fitting right between the sketches and the clay creation, allowing more detail to be planned before hiring the sculptors and, paying them a few extra $1,000. However, this wasn't the modern day CAD. This was CAD from 40 to 50 years ago. This CAD was from 15 years or so before Lara Croft came onto the scene with her groundbreaking graphical fidelity that was her triangle-shaped boobs. There were not a lot of polygons. Even the shapes from the 50s were impossible to create on the old versions of CAD from this time. However, CAD was expensive, futuristic, and high-tech, and when it comes to the workplace, let's face it, the boomers were kind of pushovers. So, when you're trying to design a new car with new tech that can't do the job of clay, and your boss screams at you to make that tech worth the dollars you spent on it, what do? You make it work. And thus, the boxy era began. Companies were flaunting their cars designed with future tech. Other car companies didn't want to look old school, so they pushed CAD and CAD adjacent softwares to their engineers, and so on and so on. And here we go. Here's a rectangle with another rectangle on top of it. Let's call it the G body. G for rectangle. Sharp angles are the name of the game. It's not a hindrance, it's a feature. Who cares if its drag coefficient is only slightly better than a cow? This thing moves the same air as a 70 Chevelle, only looks half as cool, but fuck you, this is the future, baby. As CAD improved, automakers were able to do more and create more detailed vehicles. I mean, look at the difference just 10 years makes. Here's an 85 Countach, which is essentially a doorstop. Here's a 95 Diablo, similarly doorstop shaped, but overall, a much more curvy, detailed, and pleasant design. You can hate me if you want. I know the Diablo isn't loved by the community, but I hate the Countach. It just looks like, I don't even know exactly what it looks like. It looks like the car you created out of Legos when you were a kid, except stupid. Besides the CAD thing, it's also important to note that we were beginning to enter what I call the age of efficiency back then. The world was growing, tons of people were being born, and instant communication was in the not so distant future. Gen X wanted the same golden era their parents had, but with the price of everything going up, designs had to be simplified to give those same margins. When a company learns that people will settle for less quality and pay the same price, that leads to even more corners being cut just to see how far they can take it. We see a lot of this today, with a lot of art jobs being thrown aside for cheaper options like AI. When money is the bottom line, companies will gladly sacrifice a little bit of soul. So that's my take on why cars in the 80s were so ugly. Like I said before, this was mostly conjecture based on the culture at the time. And as we all know, conjecture is fancy people talk for jumping to conclusions, so take this with a grain of salt. Also, remember I have more videos on my channel, as well as a Redbubble to sell car stuff, so go and check all that out. Did I insult your favorite car in this video? Go ahead and insult me back down below. I'm sure I'm going to definitely read it. For those of you still watching, thank you. We just hit the 5,000 sub mark. I never thought I'd get this far. And, it's good to be back in the game. Glad to have y'all here. I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.